Welcome to the second video in our series about the formal elements. This video will discuss the importance of line and shape. Line refers to the connecting points within a work of art. It's a way of moving the eye through the work of art and can create an outline or highlight key features in the work of art. It's one of the most simplistic elements, but also one of the most important structurally for any image. Though line might seem like the most basic aspect of an image, it is also an important foundation for any work of art. Line provides viewers with direction, it provides definition of an image, and it can divide or connect an image, providing movement and can even convey expression. The image here is fairly simple for a reason. You're seeing just a very plain image of a red circle. And the story told on the screen here, quite simply, is about an artist named Giotto, who was very famous in Florence in the 14th century. Giotto had, over time, gained himself a reputation, and the Pope heard about him and wanted to learn whether or not Giotto really was as amazing as everyone said he was. So he sent someone to go and meet Giotto and asked him to bring something back for the Pope to really prove his genius. And when he received the request, Giotto sat down with a single paintbrush and some red paint, in one motion painted the perfect red circle. And then he handed the drawing back to the courtier, and the courtier said, I can't take this back to the Pope. This is crazy. And Giotto said, just take it. So reluctantly, the courtier took it back to the Pope, and the Pope said, truly, Giotto must be the genius everyone says he was. And the moral of the story is that it is actually nearly impossible in one single stroke to paint a perfect circle. And so the Pope saw in this that if Giotto could paint a single perfect shape, a single perfect line, that he must truly be the genius that everyone said he was. And while this is probably not actually a true story, it's something made out of fantasy to aggrandize Giotto, it does really get to the basic importance of very simple things like line and shape. If you can master these, you can really move on to anything within art. So within line, there are a few particular key terms we should know. An outline refers to a two-dimensional shape. It creates the definition of a two-dimensional shape. So in this image of Keith Haring's Radiant Baby, we see simple outline used to indicate both the shape of a baby and to create an aura of radiance around it. Though the image is not complex, it is also easily understood. A few simple lines and we have an image that we can readily understand. Contour lines create the boundaries that allow us to perceive three-dimensional forms. They do not need to be complex lines, but they're at least curved lines that give the illusion of life in three-dimensionality. And this three-dimensionality is not present without these lines. Matisse's image, the head of a woman with a necklace, though nearly as simple as Keith Haring's image, gives us the illusion of depth. With these slightly curved lines, you get the impression that she is a three-dimensional form instead of the two-dimensional one that Radiant Baby was. Hatching is the application of a line often used in drawing to create values of shadow and create texture. So the more directions of lines that are added, the greater the texture and the sense of darkness. It's often used as an alternative to shading, particularly in drawing, although also in some forms of etching. So if you see here, we have quarter hatching, one single direction, half hatching, which is two different directions, three quarters, which is three directions, and then cross hatching, which is many different directions all applied together. And you see the more lines applied, the darker the shading becomes. Often artists refrain from using literal lines and instead favor something referred to as an implied line. So in Watteau's Embarcation for Cythera, these figures create the sense of a line that stretches all the way from the foreground to the background, which provides movement for the eye and also follows the direction in which the figures are moving. So if you're not seeing the line, here you go. The line starts all the way here in the foreground and moves back through the line of people all the way to this ship in the far distance and the mast of the ship. And that implied line is not truly there. It's not an actual line that you can really map out, but the figures are arranged to create this line so that the eye is carried through the image. It tells us how to actually perceive this particular image. The eye will typically fill in an implied line without consciously recognizing it. It's just the same way we talked about with color, the way that we will blend colors together. The eye wants to fill in the lines. So illusions such as Ertz Opel automobile, which was an advertisement, rely on this visual effect and create interest. So for example, the man's collar of his jacket is not fully defined because it blends into the blue of the background, but with these few lines above and below, we get the impression of a collar. So it's hard to have a conversation about line separately from shape. And when we talk about shape, there are actually two important words that we want to talk about. So there's shape, which refers to a two-dimensional or flat area of space, and form, which refers to a three-dimensional area of space or mass. Form and shape typically work together within a work of art. For example, in The Mystery, de Chirico uses a series of basic geometric shapes. We have squares, if you look at the windows. We have circles, if you look at the wheels and this little girl's hoop. And we have rectangles, if you look at the various sides of this wagon. And then we have kind of combination of shapes. So we have this sort of semicircle with an otherwise square doorway. So there are a lot of basic geometric shapes throughout. And the artist uses perspective to give them a sense of three-dimensionality. So instead of just simple shapes, they also become forms because they have this illusion of depth to the image. Shape is often referred to as being either positive or negative. A positive shape, such as the lemons shown above, draw our attention and push us forward into our vision. So the yellow of that lemon shape really stands out, and we really see that first. Negative shapes, such as the black area surrounding the lemons, recede into the background. We only notice them as they help define the shape that is positive. So here, there's a combination of things being used. The color, as yellow, really stands out to the eye, but it is also the much larger shape. So the yellow pushes forward into our vision, whereas the black, again, the absence of color and the smaller piece of the image recedes into the background. So we have a positive and a negative shape. You may remember this image from our video about color and light. Shapes can either be geometric or organic. Geometric shapes refer to circles, triangles, rectangles, etc. And they are simple but recognizable. So in Broadway Boogie Woogie, Mondrian relies on simple squares and colors to recreate the crowded streets of Manhattan. It's really not a very complex image. When we looked at it from the perspective of color, there are only 3 colors plus white being used. Now from the perspective of shape, there is really just one type of shape, a square/rectangle, being utilized over and over and over again. Every aspect of it can be defined by shape. And yet it is a very interesting image. You get the sense of Manhattan streets, busy cars, people, lights. It does actually represent very well the thing that it is meant to represent. Organic shapes reflect shapes and forms that are actually found in nature. So for example, here in Georgia O'Keeffe's Black Iris, she uses the shape of a simple flower, something that was very popular for her, and follows its natural curves and contours. So you see these outlines of what is a very close-up image of an iris, and we sense these really natural forms here. They are not forced, they're not man-made. These occur in nature, therefore are organic shapes. As with line, artists can also use implied shape. This refers to shapes that are not explicitly created, but are often used to provide structure within a composition. In Raphael's Madonna of the Meadows, the figures are seated in a triangular formation, with Mary's head and her feet forming the corners. So her head is up at the apex. You can see one foot at the far right, and then her other foot, which is hidden by John the Baptist, is at the far left. John the Baptist holds a crucifix or a cross, and that also helps to form the left-hand side of the triangle. Mary's presence standing behind John and the baby Jesus help to emphasize the subject of the image. So she pushes them forward into our visual plane. We really pay attention to them because Mary is behind them. She creates the separation for us between the landscape that's in the background, which is relatively unimportant, and the figures in the foreground who are actually very important. This ends the second video of our series on the formal elements. Please join us for the next video shortly.